The voice of the drum calls. It sings a song of those who came before us and those to come. A song of survival and strength. A song of participation and voice. A song that calls us together. When we come together and participate in the 2010 census, we use this tool as the voice of all our Native people. Our voice. It is in our hands. 2010 census.
Hello, I'm Kimberly Acosta. Welcome to the Native News Update on Tuesday, April 20th. Many of the stories you hear here can be found at our website, IndianCountryNews.com. And here's the news for the day from the Associated Press and other Native news sources. A less mentioned part of health reform reauthorizes the Indian Health Care Improvement Act, a bill that promotes helping Native Americans bridge the gap between their traditional healing culture and formal American medicine. Specifically, the bill provides mentoring programs, workplace support systems, and scholarship and loan programs designed to improve recruitment and retention of natives in the medical field. The top American Indian and Alaska Native students are courted by the nation's most prestigious medical schools. Even so, those enrolled last fall, 623 nationwide, made up less than 1% of the 77,000 total medical students, according to the Association of American Medical Colleges. In a related news item, the Department of Health and Human Services and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services also announced that it was distributing grants to 41 health programs operated by the Indian Health Services. The grants are part of an effort to help uninsured American Indian and Alaska Native children who are eligible for coverage under Medicaid or the Children's Health Insurance Program to obtain such coverage. As the trial for Richard Marshall continues, we go to Paul Demain for the latest update. Hey Paul, you want to give me the update today for the Richard Marshall trial?
Thanks, Kim. Yes, we're certainly getting into the time when we're over halfway done with this trial for sure. It looks like the list of defense witnesses is going to be about 6 or 7 people left because some of the prosecution witnesses were also called as defense witnesses, and the defense attorney has been able to get the information that he wants out of them in the first instance under redirect when the defense attorney gets to question a prosecution witness. So right now, this trial will most likely be done by the end of this week, if not in the next 2 days. The prosecution will probably rest today or early tomorrow at the latest, and then the defense witnesses. But essentially, they had the other key witness from Arlo Looking Cloud, what they consider to be the key witness, which is author Cyril Chapman. He's on the stand right now. He's just returned a few minutes ago, but he was on yesterday afternoon fairly extensively following Ka-Mook Nichols and Bob Ekefee. So yesterday we heard from Ka-Mook Nichols talking again about the role of Leonard Peltier, the interrogation, the bragging about shooting the agents issue, and her clarifications about why she came forward, that she wasn't paid by the FBI, that she was reimbursed for actual expenses. We had Robert Ekefee come on and talk a little bit about the forensics of the case, the ligature marks and stuff like that. And then they got to author Cyril Chapman. And so far, the prosecution has brought out a couple things. Part of the reasoning is one of the major tapes that they're using against Dick Marshall was recorded before he began cooperating with federal authorities. It was for a book that was to be written, has not been written, called Blood, Sweat, and Tears. But it was around the year 1999-2000 when apparently Chapman has testified that him and Ka-Mook began talking about this case, and there was things that troubled him, and so that he went first to attorney Bruce Ellison, who number one assured him that part of the cover-up theory is that anyone who would have looked at the autopsy report would have said that's anime pictu aquash. There was no reason to have an unidentified body, and that was part of the FBI cover-up theory that people have proposed in Peter Mathiassen's In the Spirit of Crazy Horse and other books that have been written. And essentially, he said that he then went to Minneapolis to talk to Ken Tilson about it with Ka-Mook Nichols, that they both went there, but that he went and did an interview with Ken Tilson of some kind, and Tilson assured him too, oh, if you saw the autopsy photos, you could identify anime. him and Ka-Mook went to the FBI office in Minneapolis and asked to look at those autopsy photos. And when he looked at them, he could not tell that it was even a person. The body was blackened, it was dehydrated, it was shrunken from being out there in the sun and the cold, and he said he couldn't recognize anything, and so he gave the photos to Ka-Mook Nichols, who was a good friend of Anime Piktuakwash, and she said there was no way that you could tell it. At that particular point, Searle said he understood that he had been given a whole lot of spin. And over the years, he'd done a lot of interviews with members of the American Indian movement and actually kind of aggravated them about what he thought was going on. And so sometime after that, him and Ka-Mook both made a decision to try to cooperate with federal authorities to bring this case to a head and get it resolved on behalf of Anime.
And is that when News from Indian Country got involved?
News from Indian Country got involved in this in 1994, long before any of this stuff with Ka-Mook. And in fact, Ka-Mook references the fact that she was beginning reading the material from News from Indian Country online, and in the issues that Cyril Chapman said he was reading it. It was a point of discussion. In fact, when he went to interview Dick Marshall in the year 2000, he said that he didn't know that Dick Marshall was involved in this all until talking to Ka-Mook, and Ka-Mook had talked to Choach Means and some other people who had mentioned his name. So he says, well, let's go over there. He primarily went over there to discuss the issue of the Montalou murder case, which Marshall was convicted of and later confessed to, which occurred in 1975 as well. And he was out on bond in December of 1975 for the shooting of Martin Montalou. And the discussion came up that Dick Marshall was saying, well, I read this interview of Richard Tuelk in News from Indian Country. So News from Indian Country was a point of discussion amongst many of the people involved in this case on both sides. And actually, that's what allowed Searle to segue out of the Montalou murder into the Akwash murder and ask him several questions about that. So we began doing this in 1994. Searle did this interview in the year 2000, and then perhaps in the year 2001 is when he then actually began cooperating with federal authorities. Other than the fact that in Minneapolis, the U.S. Attorney Dennis Holmes and an FBI agent said there, well, if you have this tape that Richard Marshall has this information on it, we're going to subpoena it, we're going to come get you, kind of a thing. So he's up there today. He's going to talk about several interviews that he did with people, including perhaps interviews that he did with Attorney Bruce Ellison about this case, interviews that he's done, but mainly the focus is on Richard Dick Marshall and what he said about him packing a pistol back in those days. According to the transcript, he said things like, well, in those days when you got asked to do something, you didn't ask a lot of questions of people. He admitted that John Boy Panton Graham, Arlo Looking Cloud, Theda Nelson came to the house. He simply contends that he didn't provide the gun. And so there's a lot of discussion now about whose gun it might have been, who is carrying guns, and frankly speaking, there's a lot of guns involved in that period because people on both sides of the line were packing in order to defend themselves from each other.
Will Richard go on the stand?
Richard Dick Marshall?
Yeah.
My understanding is he's going to invoke his right not to take the stand, and you're not supposed to use that against him, but it simply means that he doesn't want to be under cross-examination or say in his own words what's going on. It's known that Dick Marshall had shot one other person previously that had survived a shooting, and that he had shot Martin Montalou, execution-style killing from a pistol to the throat of Mr. Montalou, and shot him. He survived for a day and a half before he passed away. And so that's been all part of the record and part of the transcript at this point, that he had previous convictions, in part because the defense attorney started talking about it, which allowed the prosecution to ask questions about it. So he has a history of this. Whether that hurts him or not, he was named as a bodyguard and an enforcer or a gunman for Russell Means by Arlo Looking Cloud, and basically Arlo said that he was afraid of Dick Marshall on behalf of his family and his dad, Johnny Looking Cloud, who worked with the International Indian Treaty Council. So that's the reason that Arlo said he never said anything about getting the gun from Marshall for years. So again, it's going to come down to the credibility of Arlo Looking Cloud, which right at this moment seems to be fairly intact. The question is whether or not they're going to discredit Cyril Chapman and what he has in an interview, and I don't think that's going to happen. So, I think it's a little bit more than a flip of a coin at this point. A 35-year-old murder case is difficult to prove. We'll have to see where it goes.
That's the latest roundup of news from Indian Country on this edition of the Native News Update. I'd like to thank you for joining me, and have a grand day.